Thousands of Syrian protesters take once again to the streets, many demanding an end to Bashar al-Assad's regime. This as international action to deal with al-Assad is beginning to take shape. But will this be enough to deter the crackdown on Syrian protesters, and how? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. It's been an uprising that has so far claimed more than 450 lives, and with Friday billed as another day of rage, violence in Syria does not seem to be abating. Western powers have now convened a special session of the UN's top human rights body on Friday to investigate possible abuses by Bashar al-Assad's forces against anti-government protesters. There are growing calls to establish a fact-finding mission too, and US and European diplomats have asked the UN Human Rights Council to order a probe into recent events. Well, the EU have also waded in and met in Brussels to discuss a wide range of sanctions against Syria. These include the possibility of a suspension of €210 million in grants and loans to Syria each year. There also appears to be an agreement among the member states that a partnership trade deal will be shelved. It's a massive blow for Syria, given the EU is its biggest trade partner. The EU is also considering travel bans and asset freezes against members of the regime involved with the violence, along with an arms embargo. Well, to discuss all of this, joined by our three guests from Springfield, Massachusetts. Yasser Muniz, a doctorate candidate at the University of Massachusetts, specialising in urban Middle Eastern populations. From London, Nadim Shihad, Middle East analyst at Chatham House. And finally from New York, Bassam Haddad, director of the Middle East Studies Program at the George Mason University and author of Business Networks in Syria, the Political Economy of Authoritarian Resilience. Nadim Shihadi, could I start with you first of all? How do you assess the international community's stance on Syria?
Well, I personally find it extremely weak, hesitant, indecisive and ambiguous. And I think it basically gives the message to the regime that the international community cannot see beyond it and in fact supports it. And I see this as being interpreted by the regime as a license to kill or a carte blanche to do whatever they want in Syria. I mean, I think the statements that we've seen from President Obama, from Margaret Ashton, from William Hague and Gates and all these people have been very extremely ambiguous and weak.
But of course the United States would say that you have to treat each country as a separate case. You have to treat Syria differently from, say, Egypt or Tunisia.
Absolutely. And they also have to treat Syria as not being either Iraq or Libya. I think policymakers are traumatized by the Iraq experience. And they're also troubled by what they're doing in Libya. So that's what's made them hesitant about being clear about Syria. There's no need for a military intervention in Syria. What is needed is a clear, unambiguous message to the regime that this is not on.
So, Bassam Haddad, would a clear, unambiguous message to the regime do the trick? Would that work, do you think?
You know, the problem with the international intervention or the international community or the UN and all of these bodies is that they have been extremely inconsistent in dealing with countries that violate human rights and international law, as we know from cases dealing with Israel and other countries. So there is here a limitation that has to do with legitimacy and leverage. It seems that unless there is a coalition of countries or one single powerful country that wants to actually affect an outcome, it's going to be very difficult for the international community to exact leverage. A clear message is, I think, better than an ambiguous message. I agree with my colleague here. But the problem is that the Syrian regime today is not thinking at that level, is not thinking about the 200 or 300 million euros that will be cut off from Europe, or even the trade deals that will be compromised with Europe, its biggest trading partner. I think the regime is in a survival strategy mode, recognizing that what it does in the coming weeks will determine its ability to pull this off or not. And I think, therefore, it is important to have any effort that will impinge on Syria have some sort of domestic and regional legitimacy. And therefore, it seems that without a regional effort that includes some countries that the international community or some in the international community might not like, those countries in the region must be involved in any kind of effort in order for it to sound legitimate and in order for the Syrian regime to be able to justify why it's responding. Because at this point, the Syrian regime can claim that this is about, again, about international or external interference that is coming from problematic sources.
Okay.
And in many ways, some of the claims will be somewhat legitimate.
I understand. Let me throw this across to Yasser Munis. So if this list of sanctions that I just read out, 210 million euro suspension, travel bans and so on and so forth, if that's not going to work, what is this firm message that we're all talking about? What is that suddenly the Syrian government would listen to? They're unlikely to listen to anything.
The concept of international community is actually a euphemism for Western hegemony in the region. And I think that it's really very important that this doesn't happen. No intervention from the West is needed. The population in Syria and the Arab world are very aware of that fact. And they are opposed to any kind of Western interference.
All right, so what's going to stop it? So what's going to nail this?
The international actually, the ongoing peaceful protest. Any interference from the West is going to be undermining what is going on right now. So it's important to prevent that in any means.
But I don't, forgive me for jumping in. I don't quite understand. I don't quite understand what you mean. So if you say that the ongoing peaceful protest will eventually reach the ends that it wants, it's patently not the case, is it? Because more than 450 people have been killed so far. More are getting killed every day by all accounts.
It's true, but the other alternative is unfortunately a militarization of what is going on. And that's the last thing what we need in Syria. People are protesting, and the more they're protesting, the more there are casualties, the more there is fragmentation within the regime. And this is the only way we can go on to undermine or change the regime. Any intervention or any kind of sanctions from Western countries is going to undermine what is going on and militarize the peaceful protest. So I think that most Syrians, the vast majority of Syrians, are very much against the US agenda in the region, and they understand very well that any form of sanctions and intervention is going to open the way for military intervention and the implementation of the Libyan scenario in Syria.
Okay, Nadim Shahad, I'm still failing to see what the firm message might be that the government of President Assad will listen to.
It's very, very simple. There is a myth that the West supports Assad because the West prefers the devil they know to the devil they don't know. There's been statements like that from Israel, from the United States, from Europe, from everywhere. So the impression is that the West cannot see beyond the regime and that it will support Bashar al-Assad whatever he does. This gives Bashar al-Assad a carte blanche to do whatever he wants in Syria, and gives the opposition the impression that some of the reluctant ones that because he's so strong, he has such support from the international community, then we cannot go forward and express our opposition. So I think a clear message. The regime is not as strong as it looks. The regime is in fact now extremely weak. It will crumble very quickly once a clear message like this is given. It will probably become stronger if you have sanctions and become stronger if you have military intervention. But lifting the moral cover from the regime, which it still has from the West, is is much stronger and may not do the trick, but it certainly will absolve the West from being now a partner in the massacre.
Okay.
I think now you can, yeah.
Yeah. So Bassem Haddad, would you agree with that? Would you say that the regime is on the point of crumbling, and these sanctions just aren't necessary? In fact, they would have the opposite effect, and they would just bolster the Assad regime?
I'm not sure if the regime is crumbling. What is happening is, if you have been following precisely what transpired in the past few weeks, is that the regime is today trapped. It has given pretty much all it could give in terms of reforms. Clearly, these reforms are on paper, and it's basically ink on paper that is being washed by the blood of protesters on the streets. But it has given, in terms of reforms and concessions, quote unquote, what everyone was demanding in theory, at least. And that is a situation right now whereby the regime is out of quote unquote concessions or reforms. At the same time that the protesters in many ways are being faced with a siege, are being faced with a lot of violence. So we have a situation where both the regime and the protesters are trapped. The regime is trapped because it has very few places to go. Using more violence is going to deteriorate its position. The protesters, many of whom are literally trapped. The international community has very little leverage because of the legitimacy issues. This is why I have been advocating that there be a regional interference, and if anything, at the international community level, I think it is time for the international community to consider having a comprehensive view of the Middle East, and a comprehensive view of what needs to be done, not just in Syria, but in all states in the Middle East, regarding the violations of human rights and international law.
When you talk about regional
interference,
what do you mean by that?
There are states in the region, whether they are the conservative states, including Saudi Arabia and other states around Saudi Arabia. There is a new and developing kind of polity in Egypt, even though it is not yet consolidated. There are neighboring states. I know Iraq is busy with its own protests and turmoil, but it is crucial for there to be a regional effort that is combined with this international effort, so that ultimately whatever claims are made and whatever demands are made, they are not viewed to be coming from a particular set of actors associated with the West. But there is a serious and deeper issue here, and that is the lack of a comprehensive look and view of the question of violation of human rights. And with that, the UN and the international community is always going to face problems in terms of leverage in the region.
We'll get on to that in just a second. I just wanted to bring in Nadeem Shahad once more. What's your response to that, as far as sort of regional, as Bassem put it, regional interference is concerned in Syria?
Yes, I understand where Bassem is coming from, and I don't agree with it. Basically, it amounts to postponing interference in Syria until we get nirvana, until we have perfect human rights everywhere, or we have perfect intervention everywhere, and no double standards, and you know, there's no such thing as, in politics, there's no such thing as a world which is completely consistent. We have a problem. We are part of the problem because what we are saying, I mean the West, what the West is saying, is interpreted as being support for the regime, and we should be clear about what we're saying. We should not have any hang-ups about being Western. If anything, interference in Syria is much more justified than in Libya in the cynical view of Western intervention, because Libya is an important trade partner for arms, for oil, for anything like that. There's huge contracts involved in Libya. There aren't that many huge contracts involved in Syria. So it's not this, the intervention in Libya is not in that cynical Western manner. We should forget the hang-ups about involvement in Iraq. We should forget the problems of Libya. Treat Syria as it is and be clear about it.
Okay. And all right, I'm going to jump in there. I just want to bring in Yasser Muniz.
May I please comment on this?
let me just bring in Yasser Muniz. We'll come to you in a second.
May I please comment on this before we move on?
Bassem, I'll come to you just a second. We're going to stay on this issue, so we'll come to you just straight away. But I just want to speak to Yasser Muniz first of all and just see what his reaction is, and then we can come back to you.
So I think that the West has been intervening in the region, and especially in Syria, for the past at least decade, and has been trying to fund different opposition groups to sometimes destabilize the regime or topple it, depending on the U.S. government, whether it's Bush or Obama. And any new visible and direct intervention would strengthen the regime. If we compare the force or the strength of the regime 1 month ago or 2 months ago to now, we're going to see that it's been really weakened by the demonstrations. Every protesters that killed by the regime is actually unifying the opposition and making the protesters more determined to change the regime peacefully. Any form of open sanctions or boycott or military intervention is actually going to turn the population against the U.S. and unify it behind the Syrian government.
Okay.
People are very much against the U.S. agenda in the region and the Israeli agenda.
All right, Bassem Haddad, let me pass it on to Bassem Haddad. I'm sorry to keep jumping in, but we need to keep this moving to give everybody a good chance. Bassem Haddad, you wanted to come back.
Yes, please. It's very important for us to recognize that this view that we are critical of the double standards and that a regional partner or a regional effort should complement international efforts or actually be commensurate with them at the same time. I don't think this is coming from an idealistic perspective. This is not about wanting a pure world at all. In fact, I would like to point out that the distinctions between Syria and Libya are not just in terms of what the West, quote unquote, whatever that is, wants or does not want or is trading with or is not trading with. Libya is very much a contained place. If something happens in Libya, it happens in Libya. If Libya falls or the regime falls. In Syria, it's a very different situation. And I think part of the hesitancy that we are witnessing on part of the international community is not just because people are very careful with Syria for the sake of just Syria. It's because Syria is connected with a network in the Middle East, especially in the Levant, that is extremely volatile. And if Syria falls apart in a particular way, it will have ripple effects throughout the entire region that might not actually be in the interest of many countries in the region and outside. It could be that things happen differently where what happens in Syria stays in Syria, but the risks are too high and the stakes are too high for the international community to move forward as if Syria is Libya. We also need to pay attention to the fact that although tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of Syrians have gone to the streets, many other millions of Syrians have not, which is not an expression of support for the regime. It's simply an expression of the kind of concern that many Syrians have about what comes next. True, the regime's continued violence will make all of this hesitation meaningless, because there will be a different tragic situation, an even more tragic situation that will change the rules of the game. But at this point, we cannot eliminate or we cannot neglect the fact that what is happening inside Syria is also significant in terms of who is going to the streets. Okay. So I think despite what we might want to do in terms of human rights, I think it is not, it's prudent to be prudent at this point and not to push for intervention along the lines of Libya.
All right. Well, in Washington, the Republican senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham and the independent senator Joe Lieberman urged the US president to declare that his Syrian counterpart Bashar al-Assad has squandered his legitimacy and must step down. Their statement read, "We urge President Obama to state unequivocally, as he did in the case of the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and the Egyptian president Hosni Mubarak, that it is time for Assad to go." Yasser Muniz, do such statements actually make any difference, actually apply any pressure? It's not as if it's the White House saying that, is it?
Again, The U.S. has interests in the region, and there are economic interests and military interests, geopolitical interests. And it's important to look at the U.S. policies and agenda from that perspective. The idea that the U.S. is interested in pushing for more human rights or democratic regime is very inaccurate and biased. And therefore, we have to posit those statements and those kind of public intervention in that context. The Republican Party is obviously interested in preserving the authoritarian regimes because they deal much better with authoritarian regimes than with democratic populations. And actually, democracy in the region is going to threaten the U.S. interests and also the Israeli interests. So
okay, let me just bring in, I want to bring in Nadim. We've only got 4 or 5 minutes left, so I need to throw this around. So Nadim Shahad, in you come.
Yeah. I mean, this is a caricature of the U.S. position that doesn't resemble any reality. I mean, this is a caricature of the U.S. as an imperialist power which supports dictatorships and that only follows its interests. This is precisely that caricature of a position that is supporting Assad. It's the realists in the United States. I mean, there are more supporters of Assad in Washington probably than there are in Damascus at the moment. It's the realists that think it's the devil we know, it's our interests, it's the regional dimension and all that. And I want to go back to what Bassem was saying. I mean, Bassem basically proves my point that this smokescreen that we are afraid of what comes beyond Assad means that we cling to him. We think that there's going to be regional repercussions. I can only see benefits to the region. I mean, we've already seen a Fatah-Hamas deal yesterday, which probably was facilitated by the absence of both Egypt and Syria from the scene. So I think Iraq will benefit, Lebanon will benefit, the Palestinians will benefit, Syria will definitely, the Syrian population will definitely benefit. The West will benefit by not conforming to that negative caricature of the evil empire looking for their interests.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes left. Bassem Haddad.
You know, I'm not sure how Nadim has taken my comments. I was not trying to advocate something. I was trying to explain the hesitance on part of many actors, which is the case and has been actually discussed, as Nadim well knows, by not just American officials but also Israeli and other conservative Arab officials. So this is really about why is it that, and also European officials, if you've heard the French and the British statements. So it is very much about why people are hesitant, not so much that I am advocating hesitancy. However, I do advocate
I know, but
taking pause before moving into a situation. I do advocate taking pause before moving into a situation that eliminates all other possibilities. The bloodshed that's taking place in Syria is abominable and it's deplorable, and I do not think that the regime should be absolved from this responsibility. But I'm also thinking about the unintended consequences of some rash developments that are going to be pushed for interests other than the ones you have in mind, Nadim.
Yeah, we are stuck basically between the unintended consequences of rash developments and the unintended consequences of eternal hesitation, which we have seen the result of in Libya already.
Okay, I want to leave the last 30 seconds, literally 30 seconds, to Yasser Muniz, so if you can just keep it very tight. What's your view here? What is, if sanctions don't work, if there's various international pressures that are attempted to be applied here don't work, what is going to do the trick? What is going to end the violence in Syria?
Only peaceful protest. The U.S. is actually trying to push for a counter-revolution. It's trying to contain the revolution that started in Tunisia and Egypt, and it's only by interfering militarily or pushing for different forms of sanctions that it's going to scare the population in the Arab world and prevent any forms of peaceful and popular revolts. People are not fond of what happened in Iraq. They're not fond of what happened in Afghanistan. And they surely don't want that to happen in Syria.
Okay, Yasser Mounous, we appreciate that. Yasser Mounous, Bassam Haddad and Nadim Jihad, we appreciate your time, your perspective. I'm sorry, we've run out of minutes here. Thanks a lot. And thank you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Always delighted, of course, to hear from you. So just drop us an email, insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye for now.